make sure we're broadcasting live on Facebook, and then we'll get started. We have a fancy shirt here coming on here. This is the official book tour, kind of like a nudie kind of shirt, you know.
It's my uniform.
Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Hey, everybody, I'm so glad to be here with you. I'm Jeff Martin with Magic City Books, and we are thrilled to be here for one of our weekly Zoom chats with authors. We've been doing these for the past few months on Monday and Thursday evenings mostly, with the rare exception. And we're going to keep doing them. I think we have them scheduled through August now, and probably will continue. And even when we start bringing physical events back into the mix, we'll probably be peppering in some virtual options as well. So tonight we'll be talking with our friend Neal. I'll get to that in just one moment. But on Wednesday, we have kind of a rescheduled event. Wednesday, we're going to be talking with the author Stephanie Danler, who wrote the book Sweet Bitter. And she has a new memoir out about kind of growing up with two addict parents and what that was like, basically kind of raising yourself. And then on Thursday, for our regular Thursday event, we're going to be talking to Britt Bennett, who has the #1 book in the country right now called The Vanished Half, #1 novel in the country right now. So that'll be on Thursday. And then lots of stuff all the way into July and August. One to think about specifically is Coulson Whitehead. We'll be talking with him on July 6th. That's a ticketed event, and half of the ticket goes to the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation here in town. So if you saw the good work being done over Juneteenth on this weekend, that was one of the organizations that really made some of that happen. So anyway, you can get a ticket for that and support that at the same time. So that's July 6th. We could not be more thrilled to be talking to our friend Neal Pollack. I've kind of known and been around Neal's universe for a while. Neal actually wrote the foreword to my first book, The Customer is Always Wrong. He has kind of given me assignments for his site, Book and Film Globe, where he's the editor-in-chief. And we were actually talking about doing some new stuff there. And I've just kind of been following Neal's career for a long time. We were just mentioning earlier, 20 years ago, Neal's first book came out, and I got that book when it came out. I was working at a bookstore when it came out. And so it's hard to believe 20 years since. I think we're maybe 10, 11 books deep now into this. How many books are we talking, Neal? Are you hit the dozen mark yet?
No. This one that we're talking about today is my 11th.
11. So we're almost there. That almost that dozen point. And the productivity, not just from the freelance work. He's a 3-time Jeopardy champion. A lot of stuff going on. We're going to talk about a lot of different things, but also we're going to be talking specifically about the new book, POTHEAD, tonight. And he probably has a copy here he can show us. Do you have a kind of?
I do, in fact,
Yeah.
have a. It's kind of disappearing behind the virtual background. Hang, I can change that.
Yeah, we have Mr. Ed here.
I can go to no background, and then
There we go.
See the book.
So POTHEAD is a book that kind of reckons with two weird things, right? One, the idea of addiction to marijuana, which is something that has so many opinions about, and then also having that realization in a moment in time, 2020, 2019, where the access to marijuana is at the highest level it's ever been, and the way people think about it is totally changing generationally, from a legal standpoint, law enforcement. All these things are changing, and so we're going to talk about that. So Neal, welcome to our virtual event.
I'm happy to have made it here.
So you're following up Donald Trump as the next big event in Tulsa.
Yeah, no, I know that y'all had some security concerns about my appearance, but people who read me and who follow me, they're good law-abiding people.
Yeah, I don't think we got tricked by too many K-pop fans as far as our reservations go, or any kind of TikTok Zoom.
I'm on the same sort of cultural plane as K-pop fans.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry it's taken this long to actually do an event with you, and I'm sad that it has to be virtual, but I've been a big fan of your work for a long time. And what I've loved about it, I think more than anything, is that you've done something that I don't see a lot of authors able to do much now, that was something that could be done mid-century and before, which was you've done a lot of different kinds of work. You've written novels, nonfiction, books about yoga. You've done, books about basketball. You've done everything. But the central thing that runs through that is you and your personality, and kind of you're the kind of driving force in the same way that someone like, it's very different work, but like Norman Mailer, could do fiction, he could do nonfiction, he could do journalism. You do lots of freelance and have done lots of freelance. And the connective tissue is really just the kind of personality and worldview of the person that was doing that. And that always kind of bleeds through whatever the work that you're doing is. So I guess I'm curious, since you have so many interests and do so much, how do you kind of bounce around and pick what you're going to do at any given time?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, honestly, it's kind of random, and it a lot of times is based on whatever whim I'm having at the moment, and also what people will pay me to do. Like this latest book was is a memoir. It's my third memoir. I mean, it's humor-ish, but it's also very a very realistically told memoir. And where some of my other work is very absurdist and completely satirical, and then other novels kind of straddle the line. And it's just a matter of what I can sell and what I'm interested in at the moment. And I don't have a plan, that's for sure. If I did, I would have a lot more money.
Some of my favorite stuff that you write is stuff that, and this I think is a mark of a great writer, which is you make me interested in things that I thought I wasn't interested in. Like some of the writing you've done on cars, and just get that world. I'm not interested on the face of it in that at all, right?
Oh, neither am I.
But you bring something to it that is the same thing we were just talking about, which is that personality. How did you even start writing about that stuff? Is that just something you pitched one day?
Yeah, I'm kind of out of the car world now, although I would re-enter it if the opportunity arose, because it's kind of fun. You get to travel around and do cool stuff. But when I moved back to Austin, Austin, Texas, which is where I live now, from Los Angeles in 2011, and I'd gone to LA to try to make it in Hollywood, to sell screenplays and TV pilots, and I had a little success early on, and then it completely flatlined, and I was out of money, and so we kind of limped back here. And I don't know, it's just a guy I was friends with on Facebook sent me a message one night saying, I'm the automotive editor of Yahoo, which had a big auto section at the time, and he offered to send me to Croatia to drive a Bentley convertible, and he was going to pay me amount of dollars, pretty good amount of money. And I didn't have anything going on. I had no assignments, no hope. So 2 weeks later, I was flying first class to Europe and driving a luxury car. And I didn't see any other opportunity that I would have to do something like that. So I just stuck with it, even though I literally knew nothing about cars, nothing. I had no ability I couldn't tell one model from another. I didn't know anything about the mechanical side of things. I didn't like driving. I wasn't a particularly good driver. Certainly wasn't a fast driver, it tends to be a requirement for these things. And then for the next 6 years, that's almost all I did, was just travel around and drive everything under the sun. So,
I mean, it reminds me of, that kind of gonzo journalism, that Hunter Thompson would do, where he would go, on assignment to write about some, motor car thing where he doesn't really have any interest in that particularly, but he brought his sensibility to that. Did you kind of, as a younger journalist, when you were kind of especially, like late 90s, early 2000s, you were doing a ton of freelance stuff, like for traditional magazines. Did you kind of...
I'm not really a gonzo journalist. Like I went to Northwestern University. I went to the journalism school there. I was a reporter for the Chicago Reader for several years, an alt-weekly reporter. And I wrote fairly I think the work was good, but it was fairly straight up, narrative nonfiction. The reader didn't, they didn't want the writers being super voicey. They wanted the characters and the story to speak for itself. And, automotive journalism, I did a few sort of kind of wacky, voicey pieces, but a lot of them were just kind of straightforward car reviews.
Yeah. Um, so I'm curious. You live in Austin, and you've lived there for how long now? How long have you been in Austin?
Well, let's see. I've been here for 9 years this time, and then I had a 4 or 5 year stint before I went to LA. So 15 years or so total.
Yeah. So you have this book, A Pothead, which is, like you said, it's not. It has moments of levity, but it's certainly not a laugh a minute thing, because you're really serious about this idea that you have an addiction to marijuana. Now, I think almost everyone, when they think about addiction to marijuana, is kind of immediately struck with these arguments we've heard in the past by people saying you can't get addicted to marijuana. It's kind of the drug that is often used as a example of something that's not just like medicinally used, but also like a safe option. And we'll get into like the kind of evolution of how people think about it. But just the actual premise of the book, the idea that you are a marijuana addict, right? And like almost all addicts, it's not like you were, it's a constant state of being, meaning if you got some today, you could easily start falling back into that. Is that something that was a hard sell as a concept? And
You mean hard to sell to like publishers or just to people who are reading it?
I'm just curious, like if people even accept that conceit right now.
Yeah, some people do. I mean, I think if they themselves are addicted to marijuana or overindulge habitually, there's a lot. What do they call it? They call it some kind of like marijuana use disorder. They try not to call it addiction because that's just bad PR.
Yeah.
Alcohol isn't called alcohol addiction; it's called alcoholism. So it doesn't have the same stigma. So I think people who do have a problem with it get it. And I think people who are addicts and have been through addiction treatment programs or 12-step programs also accept it. And then people who are nice, if you tell them you're addicted to something, even if they don't exactly believe you, they're like, okay, that's good for you. I'm glad you're feeling better. But there are also people who are like, it's not addictive. It's a health food. It's like a smokable vitamin. It's like, in our culture, it's like marijuana is like almost considered a wellness,
right,
part of a wellness regime, like taking your vitamins, or I don't know, putting aloe vera on your sunburn. It's considered part of a health regimen. And I used to say the same thing. I'm like, hey, I'm not getting drunk. I'm not smoking. I'm not snorting coke. I'm not, shooting heroin. I'm just enjoying life, just relaxing.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I can remember, it doesn't seem like in the too much distant past, you were pretty cavalier about your opinions about marijuana. Even so, I remember listening to a podcast you did with your son, and you were pretty loose with your kind of opinions about it, and didn't seem like you thought it was a problem at all. Talk about, what was the moment that you kind of hit the wall and pretty big 180?
Yeah, I had a bad 2017, right? My mother passed away very suddenly, and very, and she was healthy 1 minute and dead 36 hours later. And I was there for the whole thing, and I watched it unfold. And my father was very ill at the exact same time. So I was 47 years old, and I had been living a very hedonistic, casual life right up until the moment when I got the call to go home to Phoenix, which is where I grew up and where they were still living. And I had marijuana gummies with me. I was high when she died. I was high at her funeral. It's hard for me to even talk about it, because I just behaved in such a immature and irresponsible way. And then I was just wasted for most of that subsequent year. And then, and all this is in the book, but I basically went to the World Series. All right. I cashed in some frequent flyer miles that I had left over from traveling around on these car journalism trips. and I spent money I didn't have. Basically, I put it on a credit card to buy a ticket to a Dodgers game, a Dodgers-Astros World Series game. I was a lifelong Dodgers fan, and I'd always wanted to go to the World Series. And I got really, really high before I went in a number of different ways. And then and then when I got to the stadium, that ticket was fraudulent. So, and instead of rationally calling the ticket company and getting a refund or getting another seat, I had a complete meltdown, screaming at the managers and the people who were working the booth. I was not rational. I was screaming profanity, and I was tearing at my hair, and I was sobbing. And I had this phalanx of security guards surrounded me and marched me away from the stadium instead of me going into the World Series. I was very close to getting arrested, and I feel like if I hadn't been a white guy, I probably would have gotten arrested. It seems unlikely that they would have been lenient with me. And so, and then I just wandered the grounds of the stadium sobbing and yelling at people. And I mean, I eventually got my senses together and actually called the ticket company sobbing and acting like a huge baby. And I actually got into the game, but that's neither here nor there, whether I actually went to a baseball game or not. In fact, I took a look at myself in the rear, in the side mirror of a car while I was wandering the parking lot crying. And I saw this guy with a big white bushy beard and red rimmed eyes and crazy hair. And I was I looked like a drug addict, like a crazy person. And, that wasn't the day I quit. I still kind of lingered a little bit in the weed for a few weeks after that, but not long. It was 3 weeks maximum. And that was it. That was that was like a hitting bottom moment for me.
And so what was it that you, I guess, knew that, other than the sheer grief and everything that you were feeling, that it wasn't that, but it was the marijuana that was causing the bigger problem, as opposed to it was just amplifying some deeper problems that were there already because of your situation?
Well, that's the thing about addiction in general, is it amplifies deeper problems, unresolved issues. I don't know if you've ever been through a treatment or a 12-step program or anything like that, but what do they call them? Character defects.
Right.
I needed to take a long, hard look at myself. I mean, obviously I was grieving my mother's death, but I still had responsibilities. My father was still alive. I had, sisters who needed my help. I was married. I am married. I had a teenage son, and, I had responsibilities that I had neglected for too long. And so, sometimes you just start doing this up. Let's say a doctor gives you painkillers, and then 2 years later you wake up and you're addicted to painkillers. But a lot of times, whatever you're addicted to, whether it's alcohol or marijuana or harder drugs or gambling or sex or eating or shopping or whatever, the myriad number of things you can get addicted to, those addictions are masking flaws and problems and unresolved issues. And so it's astonishing how quickly I was able to start untangling some of those knots once I sobered up.
Yeah.
And started really facing myself and my life as it really was.
Over the last 20 years, you've been super productive. You've written all these books. You've done all these different things. Like I said, you were on Jeopardy. You won 3 times on Jeopardy. Were you high all that time? When
I wasn't high on Jeopardy.
Yeah.
I don't think I was even high when I took the test to get onto Jeopardy. When I got the call, I needed the money real bad. Jeopardy was not just some kind of whim for me. I was in deep financial straits. And
you won how much? How much did you win?
$52,000.
Yeah.
Which is not an all-time record or anything. There have been lots of people who have won more money since, and there are lots of people who won more money before. But it was still it's a lot of money. So for going on a game show. Yeah. So I stopped smoking weed for a couple of months before I went on Jeopardy, because I knew that I needed to I needed to be able to retain some information. I had to study. I had to be crisp. So I went on this, I lost almost 10 pounds. I was doing 2 hours of yoga a day. I was doing these kind of deep yoga nidra meditations. I really went for it.
I mean, yoga's been a big part of your life,
Yeah, and that hasn't changed whether I was stoned or not. But then the second it was over, the second I went and got high again.
So obviously when you were doing that and you made the decision to kind of stop and kind of center yourself and get your mind in a place, you knew that it was having some negative effect, or else you wouldn't have stopped it, right? So there was an awareness you had. So how many times had you, before the baseball game debacle, had you ever beyond that taken a real serious moment to say, hey, I need to stop doing this?
That was the only time.
Yeah.
It kind of, it wasn't really a problem. I didn't do drugs in high school. I didn't really even do drugs in college, maybe a couple of times, but I wasn't I was a very kind of straightforward, go-getter, careerist guy in those days. It wasn't until I was into my mid or late 20s that I started, getting high sometimes. And then it wasn't really, I didn't really start doing it in earnest in big amounts until after I had some success, career success. And 20 years ago. And then the subsequent, let's say 17 years were hardcore drug use, pretty much daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes minutely, as often as possible, as high as possible.
You talk about the, when you got your medical marijuana card, I think the guy used a fake blood pressure machine.
It was like a toy.
Yeah. When was that? And also, do you think that was a turning point in terms of access, where that amped everything up when that moment happened, when you're able to...
I mean, I had a lot of access before then. After, I don't know, during my McSweeney's years, during the sort of the height of my hipster period, I guess. There was a time where
early 2000s,
where whatever. I mean, there was some a mild aura of hipness surrounding my career, which has long since dissipated, thank God. But it was there, and people were interested in getting high with me and giving me drugs, and I was willing to take it. But I usually had some around the house, but it wasn't until I moved to California and got my medical marijuana card and sort of entered the quasi-legal, soon to be actually legal age of weed, that it really started ramping up. Because then you could just go to the store and buy a bag of really high quality stuff. You could buy candy, you could, and that was just the beginning. There was some candy, but then by the end there was infinite product. I could just I could drop a bath bomb in the tub and get high just by absorbing it through my skin.
Right.
I mean, my God, what a thing. Butter, you could rub cocoa butter on your skin, and 5 hours later, as you're getting some sun, suddenly you're baked out of your mind, and all you did was rub something on your skin. My God.
Yeah.
Amazing, but horrible for me.
One of the things that I appreciate is you're not super evangelical about kind of how other people should behave around this stuff.
No, not at all. No, it should be legal.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe me, no one understands how much fun it can be to get high more than me. I had my fun. I wasn't always miserable. I wasn't always sobbing in the parking lot at Dodger Stadium, or getting into fights or having temper tantrums. A lot of times I was just having a blast, listening to music or watching movies or doing whatever. I did everything high. I don't, and also, let's face it, marijuana being illegal has created all kinds of social problems, and has led to a lot of, let's say, unequal outcomes in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And has ruined a lot of people's lives, not because they were getting stoned too much, but because they got caught doing it in the wrong place at the wrong time and had the wrong skin color.
Right.
So yeah. So I'm not I didn't write this book so I could go hang out with Jeff Sessions at the private prison industry convention.
Right.
I don't. Those people I have no interest in in those arguments. This isn't a book about reefer madness. I'm just trying to provide a sort of an example, sort of a mildly cautionary tale, or an example that people who, if it does kind of get out of control, for them to know that they're not the first person who's had this problem, and that there's a sort of a path out of it if they need it.
What do you miss most about pot?
What do I miss? I don't know. I mean, I liked a lot of things about it. I liked the sort of just reveries I would go off on. I could just kind of go for a hike and wander in my mind. I miss the kind of a goofy laughing that I would do. And, I liked the taste and the smell and the ritual of it. I miss a lot of things about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, there's a lot of, but, the mental clarity and sort of day-to-day integrity that I have to me is a good trade-off.
What was your wife's opinion of you when you were doing pot all the time? Meaning, and did she ever, obviously she wasn't pushing you to get off of it all the time.
She would tell me to stop sometimes.
Yeah.
I would get pretty pissed and be very grumpy about it. I don't have a problem. You're the one with this, it's like the usual thing. It's your problem, not my problem. I'd say stuff like along those lines, probably more pretentiously.
Yeah, but she wasn't worried about kind of how you were exposing your kid to the culture.
Yeah, she probably was, and she also wasn't. But she also wasn't aware the extent to which I was doing it. As she's read the book, and I think she liked it. It's hard to say. I mean, she was complimentary about how the narrative held together, but she was like, I didn't realize how high you were all the time.
Yeah,
and it makes her sad that I was so stoned for so long.
Yeah.
It's sad. I wasn't as present for her as I could have and should have been. And I feel better about how I've been a better husband since I sobered up. That's for damn sure.
Well, I think I want to remind people, there's a couple of links in the chat here. You can get the book. I do hope you will. I think, one of the things that this book has, you mentioned your early hipster years, and there was a moment there where, we didn't even talk about music. There was a music component going on, and all that was happening at the same time. But there's a heart to this book that I haven't seen in some of your previous work. And I guess that makes you realize, what it meant to you to kind of, obviously you mentioned your mom and how that plays into the narrative of this, and obviously your son and your wife and all that. There's a tenderness to this book that kind of surpasses some of the sarcasm or some of the jokiness of some of the other books, which are great. Was that something that just kind of came out naturally, or you think you're kind of maturing, or the fact that you're not, you're not writing under the same cloud of smoke?
I still do the Greatest Living American Writer satire pieces. And, if you follow my social media feed, it's not like there's no acid left in the pen, Right. But I with this particular story, given that the death of my parents is so central to it, there's just not, there's humor to be found in everything in life, but some topics don't lend themselves to bitter biting satire as much as others. And I feel like I've done this tone before. I mean, I've written a couple other memoirs that that also had some I feel like had some sense of humanity to them. Stretch, my book about discovering yoga, and I feel like had some of these elements. Even Alternative, which is out of print, unfortunately, but there's a kind of there's a lot of annoyance in there about having to deal with being a dad, but there was also I feel like there's kind of an underlying tenderness toward my family.
That's interesting, actually, because if you look at those books, they kind of make up this kind of trilogy of growing up a little bit, kind of growing into middle age.
Yeah, it's like middle to upper middle class Gen X white guy learns to be an adult.
So
50 years.
Yeah. Did you turn 50 this year?
I turned 50 March 1st. And then I had a little party here at the house with a live band and some karaoke and little, no drugs, but a little light drinking. And then pretty quickly after that, the world went to hell.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, you may be familiar with certain things in the news, but like we had our last party, and now it's over. That was the last party anybody I know ever went to.
So I'd like to talk just for a second about the website, the Book and Film Globe.
Yes.
You have this site and you cover, I guess, culture generally. It's pretty wide swath. I mean, I've written for you about German television shows.
Yes.
And you cover all different types of stuff. You've been running that now, what? How long?
I took over Book and Film Globe about a year and a half. Well, almost 2 years ago, actually. It was September of 2018.
Right.
So, so I'm going to probably make it to 2 years. Let's say 2 years.
Well, it's interesting, your stock and trade for the time you've been there was just, there's been all this content coming out and you're covering that content.
Right.
That has slowed significantly in terms of how are you kind of balancing that? I mean, obviously Netflix is still putting out some stuff and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and books are still coming out, so we can still write book reviews. And there is still streaming TV. And people are discovering obscure corners of it. And there's still movies. There still are, a lot of indie movies that were supposed to come out this year are still popping up on video on demand or, there's like virtual cinema that some of the indie cinemas are doing in their documentaries. But the main focus of the site, at least since the COVID crisis started, has been this, cataclysmic change in the culture, right? First you had like all this kind of, you had this kind of weird situation where like everybody was living underground in their houses, hiding. And so some people who wrote for me actually got sick. So they wrote some stuff that was, I thought, pretty interesting about like, what do you watch when you have the plague?
Yeah.
Fortunately, none of them ever had to be hospitalized and none of them passed away. And then like, lists of like 12 movies about a virus and all that kind of stuff. And so there was still like stuff going on in the background, like this sort of current like cultural ferment. This change was there were signs of it. There were sort of little mini debates going on in the literary world and the film world, and there was lots of stuff about like what's going to happen to film now or TV now. But then, after the what do you call it? The unrest, let's say, started about a month ago. Suddenly, there's been a huge explosion of cultural change. You have literary agencies collapsing overnight because the head of the agency tweets something, and that sets up a chain reaction where people were frustrated with other stuff she had done. So we covered that. Of course, you have you just have people
like Bon Appetit magazine.
We didn't cover Bon Appetit because I thought it was more of a journalism story. Like our focus is mostly like film world, book world, and then streaming TV. But There's been the debate over whether or not you should wear a mask to the movie theater. I wrote a piece. I went to the movies when a movie theater first opened in Texas at the beginning of May. It was like one of the most frightening things I've ever done. And like I've driven race cars up 140 miles an hour on a racetrack, and I would felt more at risk going to see.
How many people were in the theater with you?
There were 3 other people.
And how many seats do you think in there?
Oh, 140. I don't know, 80. Doesn't mean
super.
I had a lot of room to myself. I mean, even before the crisis, I only went to the movies at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I hate being in a movie theater with a lot of people.
Yeah, same.
Because they're annoying. They have bad habits and they cough. And now it's ideal. Coughing in a movie theater gets you kicked out. So I was like, this is actually like a really good change.
Yeah.
But so there's just lots of churn. There's lots of change in the culture, and some of the stuff we cover given that like the mainstream media is very busy with a presidential election and a pandemic and a huge generation defining debate over racism and race relations, some of the sort of the smaller stories that are culturally coming up, we can kind of carve out a little niche for ourselves writing about these things that might not be huge in the big picture, but to the people involved are still very meaningful. So it's been, suddenly I find myself like, we still run reviews, but it's more of a news site. And so, I've been kind of enjoying that challenge.
Well, a lot of people say that this year, 2020, is the most tumultuous year in the world since 1968. So right, a couple of years before you were born. So, this in our lifetimes, this probably is in some ways the most change we've seen in such a short period of time in the world. And it's a time where people are I think there was a poll that came out last week that said only 14% of Americans say they're happy, which is the lowest number it's been since 1967 or 68. So my question to you is this a time where you would be using more pot and you've stopped and now you have more stress and more change in your life and you don't have the outlet to escape like that?
I'm glad that I'm not still immersed in marijuana right now. That's an excellent question, by the way. Just thought I'd
thank you.
Maybe, but I'm glad though that I've been sober throughout these crisis months, because I've had my moments of sleepless paranoia even without it. I think most people have, especially like right, at these inflection points, like right when the lockdowns happened or right when the riots were sort of at the protests were at their most heated. I was scared and I didn't know what the future held. And then, then sort of the new normal sort of establishes itself. If I had been getting high, first of all, I might have been saying and doing a lot of stupid crap on the internet. I've been able to sort of like modulate my responses in some way. And I've also let's face it, my family needs me right now. Like they're stuck in the house with me more or less. Less stuck than they were, but it's kept my mood. My mood has been much more stable. Like, I sleep most nights better. I can sort of if I'm having a stressful moment, I can meditate or do some yoga or go for a walk. Stress eat a box of Junior Mints. We have to have some vices, right? So I think that like not being zonked out on drugs has allowed me to see what's going on around me a little more clearly than I might have. I mean, no one knows exactly what the hell is going on. Yeah. And I certainly wouldn't put myself in the 14% of people who are happy. Like, who do you have to be happy right now?
No, I mean,
I wouldn't say that I'm like unnaturally miserable.
No.
I'm very engaged and very stimulated, but what I wouldn't give.
I think we all can experience moments of happiness. I don't think it's a permanent state of being.
I'm interested. I'm certainly interested in what's going on. I'm not bored.
Yeah.
On a day-to-day basis, sometimes I'm bored, but like mentally, I'm not bored. So what would it have been like to be stoned out of your mind and watch, Katy Perry sing "Baby Mine" while wearing a Dumbo costume, live on Disney Plus, or to like get, I would have been high and watch George Floyd getting murdered. That couldn't have been healthy to do. My reaction wasn't good regardless. So it's like, I'm glad I've been sober throughout all this. Although I'll admit that there's been the occasional evening where we popped a bottle of wine. I've had a glass of wine. But
I found myself to be just kind of constantly, especially since the beginning of this, just vacillating between a general sense of helplessness because you just don't know how to like contribute to the thing.
Yeah.
But then invigorated by the challenge somewhat. And I was thinking about that in relation to your website, and you were talking about, some of this stuff is kind of narrowing down. You're having to kind of think about how to find little corners of different cultures. Yeah. I'm always inspired and challenged when I have limitations set in front of me. Like if you give me kind of a parameter, I can play in a sandbox as opposed to saying, hey, write about anything you want or do anything you want. That's too big.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways it's interesting to see how people are using this moment to kind of narrow their focus and create work. So I guess that's a roundabout way of asking, are you as productive now as you have always been, or are you feeling kind of a lag?
No, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. I mean, I'm really good actually. Like I put this book was already done. So we had to do a few like technical things on it, but from March onward. But this was already written, thank goodness. And the website has been, that's something that concrete that I can do every day. That and so I'm working on like covering the culture and making it as good a product as I can, and also it's an upstart new product. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but the owner of the company just started taking it seriously a couple of years ago. So I have the sort of business challenge of building an audience and like building a brand. So I'm fortunate to have a job. I mean, that's not something everyone can say now. So like, oh my God, I have an actual job that I can do every day. And then I've also been doing these occasional Greatest Living American Writer pieces. I was doing them more during sort of the COVID only era because there was it was easier to make fun of stuff then. Since kind of race and racism became the focus, I've been a little more wary to wade into it because it's like, you have to be careful not to say something racist,
Well,
and I don't want to. I don't like, I want to be part of the conversation, but it's like, I don't want to be this is not a good time to be a dick.
Well, that's an interesting point, actually, because one of the things that I've always appreciated about you is I've always been a writer and just a kind of a cultural commentator who kind of will say the thing that maybe other people won't say, and you're not necessarily politically correct or any of those things. And I wonder, I think if you think about that, in the 20 years since even your first book came out, do you have to kind of moderate the way you act from the brain to the page?
No, not really. I mean, I think there's just some things that are like, you gotta, the thing about writing satire is you don't ever want to like punch down.
Right.
Or very rarely do you want to punch down. And so it's like in this current moment, the only thing I can really safe, the only thing, like, the thing is, like, the Greatest Living American Writer character has always, the job has never been to make fun of conservatives or Republicans. It's been to make fun of pompous elite pundits and writers. So that was making fun of conservatives and neoconservatives during the Gulf War era, with the Second Iraq War. It was making fun of liberals before then, and then and I think right now the proper tone would be also to make fun of like whiny white liberal writers.
For those who don't know about this character, a good analogy would be something like the way people think about maybe how Stephen Colbert had his TV show on.
I did it first.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but right.
Much less profitably. So.
but you kind of see this as like, it's a persona. It's a persona that's
it's a satire of a pompous literary figure. Right. Originally conceived of to make fun of Norman Mailer and Gore Vidal and Tom Wolfe and that generation, and Philip Roth, all of whom are dead. And that's a running joke with the Greatest Living American Writer. When I write about him now is that they're all dead except for Joyce Carol Oates and him.
Yeah.
And she has some kind of magical witch powers that they keep her alive. And so and because I'm still like I'm 50, so I could still keep, assuming I don't develop some sort of degenerative brain disorder, I could keep doing this for a while. But it is at this particular moment, I've started and stopped a couple of pieces because I'm just like, it's a super fine line you got to walk, and I'll find it. I'll find it at some point. You know, this sort of phenomenon of like of writers like who aren't actually racist, like having to deliver these like mea culpas, you know, for supposed sins. I think there's some comedy in that, but you know, I just want to be careful.
You mentioned that you know, if you were still kind of regularly partaking in marijuana, that you said I might say something stupid or I might do something. So to that point, is there an edge that has dulled somewhat since you?
No, no, I don't think my edge is dull at all. I just think I'm more mindful.
Yeah.
Slightly more mindful. And I wouldn't say that I don't. Yeah, but I'm not itching for a fight. You know, I sometimes I feel like there's stuff that needs to be said, but I'm not looking for trouble. And I feel like when I was on drugs and like kind of at the height of my hipster fame, for whatever the hell that was, I was kind of like looking for trouble, and I was getting into trouble. So I often found it, and I don't want trouble, you know?
Well, that's an interesting moment, though, actually, because that's where I think if people will look back to some of the maybe TV appearances and stuff, there was a confluence, I think, of that character.
Yeah.
And you, where there was a little bit of a blurred line there.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Which I was just like, I wasn't getting particularly good advice. I wasn't taking good advice. I was not in a sober state of mind.
Yeah.
So, and that doesn't, being sober doesn't necessarily mean being unfunny or being boring. I just was not like thinking clearly.
Right.
So like, shit got muddled and like, things didn't go as well as they might have if I had been like more engaged in the moment, as opposed to like living in this sort of fantasy.
I want to remind our viewers before we wrap up here, you can go into the chat link here, buy a copy of Pothead, read it. You're going to love it. Like I said, there's a lot of laughs in there because Neal can't help himself, but it's a very touching book. And I guess I'd want to finish with a couple of questions about the response. I'm curious, like you said, you live in Austin, very, very liberal space. Access to dispensaries and marijuana and everything is
no, there's no access to marijuana in Texas.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It is not the same as it is in other states. But you imagine that there are amount of people who want access in Austin.
Yes.
There's an interesting dichotomy there.
Yes.
Have you had anybody kind of, I don't know, accuse you of being a narc or just kind of give you any shit about, the thesis of the book since it came out?
Well, it only came out last week.
Well, or since they heard about it coming out.
Yeah, I've had some people I had a couple of people call me a narc, actually. And then I've had, other people a lot of people said it's not addictive. I'm glad for you, but you really shouldn't be promoting this because it's reefer madness, and it's like there's all these people locked up because of minor marijuana crimes, et cetera, et cetera. And I acknowledge all these things. But I don't know, it hasn't been the overwhelming response though. Like I wrote a piece, sort of the genesis of this book, I wrote a piece for the New York Times editorial page, which James Bennett approved before he got fired. I don't think I was one of the matches that lit that fire. And I wrote that piece, and most of them, how people say like, I got thousands of responses. I was overwhelmed. I was like, I was not overwhelmed. I was whelmed. There were a dozen or so, emails, maybe 24 over the course of 6 months, and most people were like extremely supportive. So, I in general, if somebody tells you like, you're an alcoholic. If I said to you, Jeff, I'm an alcoholic and I'm just trying to get sober, you wouldn't be like, no, you're not. Don't be a wuss. Have a drink.
Right.
Come on.
Right.
Have some heroin.
That's where you get to the double standard of the way people think about marijuana versus every other substance.
Exactly. Right? So, I just want to like push the thinking forward. Nothing I'm going to say or do is going to change marijuana is like cultural freight train.
Yeah.
You know, the only reason why legalization hasn't been barreling forward further this year is because there's just a lot of other stuff going on.
Right.
You know, absent this crazy turmoil, you know, it would continue to be moving forward. There's a lot of it has a lot of momentum, and it's just kind of biding its time.
Yeah.
And I just want to be a resource for people who, you know, again, like might have their own. This is important. I just received a note from someone saying that baseball has been has received a mandate to play a season, 60-game season. So at last, I'm going to have something to do. You know, those 3 hours a day were not 3 to 4 hours a day were not killing themselves easily.
Yeah, so it's gonna be
running out of Canadian sitcoms to watch on Netflix. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt my
no, that's great.
Nothing's more important to me than that at this moment. And then we have one other question from Susan, who says, "Don't leave without telling us about my Zoom background." Well, that is of course the famous Mr. Ed. I play Zoom trivia once or twice a week with my pub trivia team. You have to have been on Jeopardy in order to play pub trivia with me. But there's been like this whole like emergence of Zoom trivia because obviously no one's going to bars, and so I have a variety of sitcom backgrounds. Like, you know, that's the set from Three's Company. That of course is the Brady Bunch living room. That is Don and Megan's apartment from Mad Men. Jeff, you probably recognize that one.
Very much.
That's the Seinfeld apartment. There's the diner from 90210.
Oh yeah.
Mr. Ed. There, you know, that of course is my actual stoop. There's a little grumpy green man in the trash can who lives right beneath me.
So I looked this up. We were talking about this before. So Mr. Ed,
that's Dunder Mifflin. That's the house from Leave It to Beaver, Simpsons. You know.
The horse that played, one of the horses that played Mr. Ed was really named Bamboo Harvester. That was the actual name of the horse. And there is a giant headstone in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, which is here in northeast Oklahoma. And says he was, it says, most visitors and locals believe the horse is Bamboo Harvester, a Palomino born in 1949 who played Mr. Ed from 1961 to 66 and then retired. He became sick in 1968 and was euthanized before being laid to rest near a cherry tree in 1970. Now, it's up for debate as to whether this is true or not, but Alan Young, who played Wilbur on Mr. Ed, says that was the horse. So, I mean, or said rather, he's dead too. But
why wouldn't you believe him? You know, it's like, why would he make that up? So, well, that's kind of a touching story. Well, maybe someday.
Yeah, come visit.
If I come to Tulsa for the next book or for some other reason, you know,
we're gonna go drive down.
That's a political rally. You can take me to Mr. Ed's grave and we can have a chat.
We'll do it. We will make plans to do it. Well, I appreciate you doing this. It's been really fun. I hope everyone will get the book. There's a link here. Please do that. You'll really enjoy it. Also, get Neal's back catalog. You're just gonna, if you haven't read Neal's work before, it is a real joy. You're gonna love it.
Most of it's still in print. And also, I want everyone to read Book and Film Globe, please.
Yes. And I think
it's good.
And I might do a piece for you on going to a movie theater soon. So we'll see.
Yeah, I want you to do that piece actually, because as soon as you mentioned to me that you were going to a movie theater, you know, unironically, I was like, oh, all right, well,
more content.
Well, more content. It was also it was about a movie that we hadn't covered, and you know, suddenly going to the movies is like this act of courage.
Hey, baseball's back. We're going to movies.
Nothing could possibly go wrong from here. Everything's cool.
Yeah, we're back. Okay.
Yeah, we're back. I'm open.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. That was a fun. Thanks to everyone for showing up. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.